John, thank you very kindly for your very warm and generous introduction. I do appreciate that. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. And thank you for the Chamber for giving me this opportunity, which I think is, it started in 2001 or 2002, so it's been just about a decade. And only when elections have intervened have we missed this annual report in the spring of every year to the Regina Chamber, and I'm very glad to be back for this opportunity this year. This, of course, is a very busy week in Regina with the Victoria Day holiday and the royal visit, celebrating 60 years on the throne for Queen Elizabeth. This year of 2012 also marks the 60th anniversary of the old age pension in Canada, the 30th anniversary of our Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and the 100th anniversary of the Saskatchewan Legislature, the Regina Cyclone, and the sinking of the Titanic. And if you'll forgive me one partisan note, I can't resist, 2012 is also the 100th anniversary of the one and only time in the 20th century that a Conservative government actually balanced a budget in Canada. It happened only once. The year was 1912. The Prime Minister was Robert Borden. He inherited his surplus from Wilfrid Laurier, and he kept the books balanced for 1 year. Now, I got that off my chest. I'll come back to fiscal issues just a little bit later. First, I wanted to tell you where I've been for part of May. All of last week, I was a member of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs, traveling in Ukraine. This is a country that matters a great deal to a lot of Canadians. Ukrainian emigration to Canada started over 120 years ago. Laurier was a great defender and promoter of Ukrainians in Canada. Today, 1.3 million Canadians trace their family heritage to Ukraine, including 13% of Saskatchewan's population. Ukrainians are prominent in all walks of life, from premiers and lieutenant governors and governors general to nuclear physicists and business leaders, and most importantly, Saskatchewan roughriders. The world rejoiced when Ukraine gained its independence from the former Soviet Union exactly 20 years ago. Canada was the first Western country to offer diplomatic recognition. And we cheered the Orange Revolution in 2004 that brought the beginning of democracy and a market economy. But since then, further progress has been slow, and some initial gains have been lost. Corruption is a big problem. Academic freedom, religious freedom, and freedom of the press are under constant pressure. Democracy, human rights, and the rule of law are in jeopardy. The judicial system is being used as a tool of political oppression. With more elections just 5 months away, the two principal leaders of the opposition are in jail. Our parliamentary committee visited Kiev and 2 other cities, held extensive hearings. We listened to government officials, opposition leaders, the clergy, academics, the media, NGOs, civil society, business people, and the families of the jailed political leaders and their lawyers. The bottom line is this: Ukraine is obviously facing huge challenges. Success is far from a sure thing, but hope springs eternal. Ukrainians yearn for genuine democracy and freedom, and Canada can help by pushing incessantly for the release of those political prisoners and independent medical attention for them in the meantime, by providing at least 1,500 election observers, as has been requested for this summer and fall, by adjusting Canada's foreign aid program to focus more on democratic development and civil society in Ukraine, by encouraging Canadian broadcasters, both public and private, to help foster honest, independent news coverage in Ukraine, by making any free trade agreement conditional upon sufficient progress being made on democracy, and by taking the lead in the G8 and the G20 to combat money laundering in Ukraine and to obstruct the travel and illicit business activities of oligarchs and corrupt government officials. All of these things Canada can and should do to make a meaningful difference. Just wringing our hands is not enough. That visit, 1 week in Kiev, Kharkiv, and Lviv, drove home to me what a privileged place this Canada of ours really is. How our democracy, our rights and freedoms are so special, so precious, and how by and large we take all of that for granted. But we shouldn't. Millions upon millions of people around the world would give their eye teeth to have the right to vote like Canadians do. And those untold millions would be astonished that barely 60% of us bother to go to the polls when we have the opportunity. There are, no doubt, many reasons for that malaise and indifference, and no doubt all political parties share the blame. But today I want to concentrate on two factors: notions of impunity in politics and the politics of polarization, which I think are a big part of what's wrong with Canada's political system today. Now, Mr. Harper is very happy to remind us, as he frequently does, that he won a majority government last year, and he claims a very strong mandate. A majority of seats in the House of Commons, yes. But majority support among Canadians, not even close. Only 60% of eligible Canadians voted, and the government got barely 40% of that 60%. So their mandate comes from just 24% of eligible voters. 76% of eligible Canadians cast their ballots for somebody else, or, more seriously, didn't vote at all. Ambiguous mandates like that require careful, thoughtful interpretation. They should not be exaggerated. The government should not use sheer numbers to do whatever it wants with impunity, without regard to what anyone else thinks or holds dear. Attitudes of impunity lead to some bad things, like excessive ministerial behavior. Minister Oda's costly orange juice and those limousines at $1,000 a day. Or Minister Clement's ornamental gazebos and the sidewalks to nowhere in Muskoka. Attitudes of impunity lead to violations against democracy. Honest, decent questions asked in question period in Parliament should be answered, not just sloughed off. Parliamentary committees should not be forced to go behind closed doors, ironically to do the public's business in secret whenever the topic becomes problematic. Closure rules should not be used at every turn to shut down reasonable debate. And the government should not jam 74 pieces of legislation all together in one omnibus bill to change everything from food inspection to civilian oversight of Canadian spies all at once without the possibility of serious scrutiny. Attitudes of impunity also lead to mistakes, like the F-35 fighter jet fiasco. More than $30 billion is at stake here. The biggest sole-sourced, untendered, uncompetitive contract against all the rules in Canadian history. The Auditor General says this file has been badly managed, with the government keeping two misleading sets of figures. And the Parliamentary Budget Officer says it was a deliberate attempt to conceal the truth. That's the sort of thing that flows from an attitude of impunity, from the notion that might makes right. You know, we've got the numbers to force our will, so no other views are really worthy of consideration. Another policy example is the government's plan to cut back old age security. As I said, this year the OAS is 60 years old. It took a constitutional amendment back in 1952 to bring it into effect. Without consultation, the government now plans to delay eligibility for OAS. If you are under 54 today, you will have to wait beyond the age of 65 to begin your old age pension benefits. For some people, that's fine, that's okay. But for many, it's not. And I think there are 5 things wrong with this major assault on retirement incomes. First, it does break a direct and explicit promise that was made by Mr. Harper in each of the last 3 elections, 11, 08, and 06. Second, it's an attack exclusively on the lowest income, most vulnerable, older Canadians. Wealthy people are not affected. 75% of those who receive the old age pension live on incomes of less than $40,000. Without it, poverty among seniors would increase by 1/3. The worst affected will be elderly women living alone. Third, this age change is, from an actuarial point of view, entirely unnecessary. Economists from UBC, from the University of Calgary, from York University all agree, as does the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, both the Fitch and Moody's rating agencies, and the C.D. Howe Institute on the right, and the Centre for Policy Alternatives on the left, and the government's own actuaries that work for OSFI, and the Parliamentary Budget Officer. They've all run the numbers, and they all say the OAS is sound as it is. It ain't broke, so don't fix it. Fourth, this age change does not actually save public money overall. The needs of low-income seniors are real, and delaying the age doesn't make those needs go away. It just shifts the cost burden onto provincial welfare programs. And fifth, if the government is really aiming to cut off the cost burden from that big bulge of retiring baby boomers, well, they're already too late. By the time this age change gets fully phased in over 17 years, most of that boomer bulge will already have passed through the system, and OAS costs will be declining naturally in any event. This decision is, I think, primarily ideological. It's a reflection of Mr. Harper's view that the federal government should not largely be in the pension business. And it flows from that sense of impunity that ignores 2/3 or more of Canadians who oppose this policy idea. So impunity leads to bad governance. And so does the tendency toward polarization in our politics. Some argue that a polarized political system will be so much simpler. With just 2 dominant parties, left and right, everything gets reduced to a straight, clear, 2-way choice. They're mutually exclusive, no complexities. Black, white, right, wrong, good, bad. Simple, right? Well, maybe, but better? Not so much. If you want a good illustration of what deep polarization gets you, take a look at the political and economic trouble that currently prevails in the United States. Their partisan environment is absolutely toxic. Their economy remains in trouble, and their polarized politics seem incapable of finding solutions that and attract broad-based common support. It's all about wedges, not bridges. It's about driving people apart into opposing camps, not pulling them together in any kind of common endeavor. That's what polarization does. It's divisive, negative, corrosive, and wasteful. It creates, if you watch it, it creates these white-hot differences between 2 hostile camps. It feeds off conflict, and it gets personal. You learn to hate your opponent. You don't want to just defeat him, you want to destroy him. Because polarization teaches you that you're righteous, all the good is on your side, and the other guy is not. You see that tactic in the government's approach on some of its criminal justice legislation. If you don't support their prescriptions, even the ones that are unconstitutional, then somehow you're siding with child pornographers. You also see the problem in another way in what Mr. Mulcair had to say about resource development in Western Canada. That too tends to contribute to polarization. Yes, we can certainly have a strong, valid debate about whether environmental protections are good enough, and you can argue about what makes the value of the dollar too high or too low. But the way in which Mr. Mulcair expressed himself seemed calculated to drive some wedges, pitting resource industries against manufacturing, Western jobs against Eastern jobs, depicting our national economy as a zero-sum game in which if I win, you have to lose, and vice versa. And then baiting 3 Western premiers, as you would never bait Ontario or Quebec. Just as Jim Flaherty and Stephen Harper are wrong, I believe, to belittle the Ontario government and to encourage investors to leave that province, so Mr. Mulcair is wrong, I believe, to depict Western resources as the cause of some economic disease. Surely, we want the resource sector and the manufacturing sector both to succeed in both Western Canada and Eastern Canada. We want development to be sustainable and prosperity that's broadly based and deeply shared. And polarization won't get you there. And here's another consequence, a serious one, I think. The deep-seated conflict that lies at the heart of polarized politics truly mobilizes only a relatively small number of people on one extreme or the other who relish that kind of politics. They really like the fight. It turns them on. But it also turns off large numbers of other people. They don't hold extreme views. Perpetual campaigning is not their thing. They don't like polarization or the conflict it breeds. So what do? They just drop out of the political process. And on election days, those are the people who stay home. But here's, I think, the good news. Canada is far too complex a country, too subtle and nuanced, too fundamentally decent, too full of hope and ambition and opportunity and goodwill, to be content for very long with the wedge politics of division or greed or envy or fear. People will look for something better. The natural Canadian instinct is to want to pull together to achieve the goals that are bigger and more worthy. So from a liberal perspective in Parliament, I think we need to do 2 things. First, we need to be effective critics where the government is making mistakes, especially that one-note, monotone message about austerity at the expense of everything else. Strong, prudent economic management, yes, that was my mantra when I was finance minister, building on the exceptional work of Paul Martin. But as with old age pensions, many of the government's cuts that seem to be announced almost on a daily basis seem very strange. Food inspection and labeling, environmental protection, maritime search and rescue, border services, prison safety, Aboriginal peoples, statistics, archives, libraries, and science. All of those things have been cut, and the list goes on. And Saskatchewan seems especially hard hit. PFRA, the Indian Head Tree Farm, community pastures, that key food inspection office in Moose Jaw upon which the entire livestock industry in Saskatchewan depends, the Rural Development Fund, science and research cooperatives, the Bratz Lake Air Quality Observatory just south of Regina, every international trade office in Regina, the immigration office here in Regina, and rumor has it there's more to come. For all governments struggling with the aftermath of recession, a critical management principle is this. Yes, budget cuts can reduce your spending, but they won't necessarily reduce your deficit or help build a strong economy if they are seen to be unfair or undermine growth. That was the core message coming out of the G8 meeting last weekend at Camp David. Mr. Harper disagreed with it. He maintained the line about austerity, austerity, and more austerity. But the rest of the G8 seemed to be moving in a more nuanced direction. The world economy is in tough shape. Europe could well slide back into another recession. and the US is obviously still struggling. Canadian stock market values, checked it this morning, they're actually lower today than they were 6 years ago. So the way back to prosperity is challenging. But Canada has one vital advantage. Thanks to the crucial decisions that were taken and implemented in the 1990s, when we were facing back then 27 consecutive years of continuous deficits, when our federal debt to GDP ratio was nearly 70%, and the IMF was quite literally knocking on the door, and we've seen in Greece and other places what that means. Thanks to the hard work that was done back then in the 90s, this country actually enjoyed a full decade of balanced budgets starting in 1997, and a plummeting debt ratio down to a very manageable 30%. 70% in the 90s, brought down to 30% now. So beyond austerity, Canada, because of that, has an opportunity for a growth strategy. And that's the critical ingredient that is missing today compared to the economic circumstances of the 1990s. Through all the challenges of the 90s, we maintained consistent growth economically of 3% or better every year. But that's not the case today. Growth rates are low and sluggish. So we need a growth strategy. Prudent management, yes. Be careful about the spending. But more importantly, the emphasis needs to be on growth. And that's where I hope the Liberal Party can and will be proactive and creative. How and where to invest for growth, productivity, competitiveness, and world-class excellence. I believe education, higher learning, and skills need to be a top priority. We need to beat down barriers to education because we will thrive on the quality of our brain power. We need to build a smart workforce and a more inclusive workforce that better engages and retains young people and women, Aboriginal people and new Canadians, the disabled, and those who are left on the margins. Science, research, and innovation need to go hand in hand with that, as does fact-based, evidence-based decision-making. We need more modern infrastructure and trade links that connect us far better to the world's fastest growing economies, especially in Asia. And that will require an intelligent focus on development that is truly sustainable. The government and the official opposition are essentially saying that you can have growth or you can protect the environment, but those two things are mutually exclusive. Pick one. You can't have both. But that hard dichotomy is not what Canadians want and not what Canadians need. They want the genius of a policy that can pull economic development and environmental sustainability in a common sense way together. So there is a lot of work to be done. We shouldn't waste our energies on polarized politics or any misplaced sense of impunity. This is a time to pull people together, to stand on higher ground, to reach for something better. And I hope the Liberal Party, in some small way, can be a catalyst for that better way. Thank you.
Thank you, Ralph. I've got a few questions for you. One of them I've asked you before, a few years ago. Two are the same. What are your views on the immigration changes that have just taken place?
What's needed, I think, is a sensible balance. And the trouble with the immigration changes, as with, I understand the EI changes this morning, which I don't know the detail of, but one principle is the same, is that the government is taking a lot of arbitrary power to itself to be able to make changes without any further reference to the public or to Parliament or any form of outside external scrutiny. And I think there's an argument there that we want to be flexible and be able to move quickly. But on the other hand, when you make arbitrary secret decision making the normal way, the normal pattern of making decisions, then I think you're heading toward a policy crash that could be exceedingly difficult. The government apparently wants to focus almost all of the new immigration on the highly skilled class within the immigration categories. And certainly Saskatchewan needs skilled workers. But one of the factors in setting and calibrating this, one of the factors to bear in mind is that those new workers coming into Canada will settle better, they will become productive faster, they will broaden the tax base and make a larger contribution to our economy faster if they are happy and well settled in this country. And when you tend to exclude members of the family and just say, you know, the one person can come but the rest can't, then I think you're heading toward an unsustainable, untenable situation. It's got to be very delicately calibrated. And here in Saskatchewan, with our million and a little bit, we need more people, and we need more successful families, and individual immigrants will be happier and more effective and settle faster and do better in the long run if they can do so with their families. So I think it's a very delicate balance.
No, I don't mean to get you and Bruce going on this one, but I got asked the question, so I have to answer it. Sorry, Bruce. Any chance in saving the wheat board?
Long time ago. There's another court case that another phase of it was heard yesterday in federal court yesterday. This is the original case that was heard last December, where a number of farmers took the government to court because the government was proceeding to dismantle the Canadian Wheat Board without having a prior plebiscite in which farmers would have the right to vote. And the issue at stake is the interpretation of the Act. Does the Act require a vote or not? I wrote that Act, so I know what the intention was of the Government of Canada at the time. And clearly the intention of the Government of Canada was, if ever any future government is going to change the marketing mandate of the Canadian Wheat Board, either to make it bigger or smaller, then first of all, you have to ask farmers whether they approve of that specific change. That was the intention of the law. The case, the judge of the federal court that heard the case and handed down the judgment last December ruled that that is in fact what the legislation intended. It didn't say the government cannot change the mandate of the Canadian Wheat Board. It simply said, if you want to, first of all, ask farmers. And if you don't want to ask farmers, it's very simple. Amend the Canadian Wheat Board Act and delete Section 73(1) that gives farmers the right to vote. The point is, the government can change the law, but until it changes the law, it can't break the law. That's the point, as the judge found it in the judgment last December. That's now under appeal. There's another hearing argument before the federal the Court of Appeal yesterday in Ottawa, and we'll see where it goes. It's going to be a very difficult challenge here, one way or the other, if the ruling is in favor of the farmers who are challenging the law. Trying to sort this out after the fact is going to be like trying to unscramble eggs. But it just underlines the point. If you want to change the law, follow the law and do it the right way. Don't just ignore the law and behave like a kind of a bull in the china shop. There was a very telling line in that judgment last December where the judge who heard the case said that the government had behaved in a manner that was an affront to the rule of law. I heard a lot about that when I was in Ukraine. You know? And I don't mean to compare the two situations, it's radically different, but it's the same principle. The law exists, and if you object to the law, change it. Don't just break it. And we'll see. We'll see where the court case goes, but that will be the critical decision of the Federal Court of Appeal, and undoubtedly, it's going to go to the Supreme Court of Canada. So we'll see where all of that ends up.
Because there's a couple of city councillors in the room here, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you this question. And then I got one more and we're done. Infrastructure. Mayors throughout the country have been screaming really that there's a deficit that needs to be addressed, and it can't just be property taxpayers that address this issue. What are your comments on that?
Well, the number is a bit of a movable feast, but it's in the billions of deficit in terms of the infrastructure backlog. We were discussing that a little bit at lunch, and the vast majority of municipal infrastructure in this country was built in the 1950s and 1960s, and it's wearing out at an increasingly rapid rate. So it's going to take a significant amount of new investment, and it is beyond the capacity of property taxes to be able to bear that burden. Probably beyond the capacity of business taxes to bear that burden too. So I think you do need a three-way partnership: federal government, the provinces, and the municipalities. And we've got the model for how to do that right. It's the gas tax transfer. This was something, I'm pleased to say, was in my budget in 2004 and 2005, when we said that a portion of the federal excise tax on gasoline will be transferred automatically every year to Canada's municipalities, and it will escalate over time. It's now 50% of the amount of money that the federal government collects from the excise tax on gasoline flows automatically every year to the municipalities across the country. I think we should probably get to the point where we say that the gas tax collected federally should be entirely transferred to municipalities. So it becomes a new and much larger guaranteed revenue stream for municipalities. But it's still going to take national and provincial investments beyond that. We've got to do it in a sensible way that's paced out over time. But of all the things, and this is the economists in the Federal Department of Finance. This is what they told me when I was finance minister, and I know this is what they told Minister Flaherty because he has said this is what they told him. The single most effective measure to encourage economic growth and jobs is infrastructure. That is the single most cost-effective way to grow the economy. There are other things you can do, but if you've got cost-effective infrastructure projects to undertake, that will get you there faster than anything else. So the current agreements are in place until 2014. Between then and now, I think there needs to be a new federal, provincial, municipal, three-way agreement about how this infrastructure deficit is going to be tackled in a way that improves the quality of life and the economic efficiency of local communities, but also contributes to the national economy in the most effective way. It would be one of the most durable, useful economic initiatives.
This is the question that I asked you a number of years ago. I'm sorry, Pam. Many people throughout the country see you as a leader in the Liberal Party and think that you should be seeking the leadership. Do you have any comment? I don't actually expect you to answer the question. Do you have any comments on that?
We're adjourned. Well, I appreciate the compliment, and thank you for that. It's the most miserable, thankless job. And the process that the Liberal Party will undertake will start in June. The National Executive will decide the rules that will apply for the future. And the process has to conclude by no later than June of next year. Probably it will conclude faster than that, but at the very least, there'll be 1 year here of leadership process. I think the party will generate several very interesting, very colorful, very exciting candidates, and I hope that it is a wide open, vigorous campaign that gets the juices flowing again for what the Liberal Party wants to contribute to the future of Canada. I suppose whenever one of these things comes around, you think about whether you want to participate in it yourself, and I suppose I'll think about it, but I think the party will put forward a remarkable slate of candidates, and Canadians will have some very good people to choose from. What did he say? What did he say?
Normally I give
No, I couldn't possibly repeat that.